I flew halfway around the world for a woman I thought I knew. For 12 months we talked every single night. Video calls that lasted hours. She'd sip her morning coffee while I ate my dinner, and we'd just connect. Her name was Maureen, 28 years old, an English tutor from Manila. I'm Harold, 62, retired railroad inspector from Ohio. After my wife Martha died 3 years ago, I never thought I'd feel alive again. Until those video calls started. Until she started laughing at my stories, asking about my day, making me feel like I mattered to someone again. I can't wait to hold you. She texted me the morning I landed at Ninoy Aquino International Airport. My hands were shaking as I walked through customs, not from the 14-hour flight but from pure anticipation. The humidity hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I was about to meet the woman who'd given me a reason to wake up every morning for the past year. Harold. Her voice cut through the chaos of the arrival hall. There she was, exactly like her pictures, exactly like those video calls, but somehow more real. Long black hair, yellow sundress, that shy smile I'd seen 1,000 times on my computer screen. She ran to me, actually ran, and threw her arms around my neck. You're really here. I can't believe you're really here. I dropped my bags right there in the terminal and held her. She smelled like jasmine and felt so small in my arms. For the first time since Martha passed, I felt complete again. I brought you something, she said, pulling back with that familiar giggle. She handed me a bottle of mango juice. For the heat. You look tired. I wasn't tired. I was overwhelmed. This beautiful woman had waited 2 hours at the airport for me. Thank you, I managed to say. She took my arm and led me toward the exit. Come on. I have a taxi waiting. I picked a nice hotel for us. You're going to love it. The taxi ride through Manila was like stepping into another world. The traffic was insane, but Maureen held my hand the entire time, pointing out landmarks, telling me stories about her childhood. I grew up not far from here, she said, gesturing toward a cluster of buildings. My family has a small apartment. Maybe you can meet them while you're here. The thought of meeting her family made my heart race. This was real. This was happening. I'd love that, I told her. I want to know everything about your life. She squeezed my hand tighter. And I want to show you everything. I want to share my world with you. The hotel was better than I expected. Clean, modern, air-conditioned. Maureen had already checked us in, already had the key. I wanted everything to be perfect for you, she said as we rode the elevator up. I've been planning this for weeks. She'd thought of everything. Toiletries, a welcome card, even my favorite beer waiting in the mini fridge. You don't have to take care of me, I told her, but she just smiled. I want to take care of you, Harold. You've been so good to me. Good to her. During our video calls, I'd listen to her cry about work stress, family problems, money troubles. I'd sent her small amounts here and there, maybe $300 total over the year, just to help with groceries or internet bills. It felt good to be needed. Our room was on the 15th floor with a view of the city skyline. Maureen immediately went to the window and pulled back the curtains. Look at this view, she said. I specifically requested this room for you. I wanted your first night in Manila to be special. The city sprawled out below us, millions of lights twinkling in the distance. It was beautiful, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was wearing that yellow sundress that made her look like sunshine, and when she turned to smile at me, I felt like the luckiest man in the world. It's perfect, I said. Everything's perfect. We spent our first hour just talking, sitting on the edge of the bed like teenagers. She showed me photos on her phone, pictures of her family, her friends, places she wanted to take me. This is my favorite restaurant, she said, pointing to a small local place. And this is the park where I go when I'm sad, and this is the mall where I buy all my clothes. She was animated in a way I hadn't seen since our early video calls, excited and energetic. I have so many plans for us, she said. 2 weeks isn't enough time to show you everything, but we'll do our best. That first night, we walked to the restaurant she'd shown me in the photos. Small place with plastic chairs and the best chicken adobo I'd ever tasted. She ordered for us in Tagalog, then translated everything. The waitress says you have kind eyes, Maureen told me. I told her you're the kindest man I know. I felt like I was glowing. When other patrons stared at us, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt proud. You make me feel 30 again, I told her over a San Miguel beer. She reached across and touched my hand. You make me feel safe. For the first time in my life, I feel completely safe. We talked for hours that night, just like our video calls, but better because I could actually touch her hand, see the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. She told me about her college degree in education, how hard it was to find steady tutoring work, how she was saving money to help her family move to a better neighborhood. I don't want to burden you with my problems, she said, but I stopped her. Your problems are my problems now, I said. That's what this is, right? We're together now. She smiled, but something flickered in her eyes, something I couldn't quite read. Yes, she said, we're together now. The restaurant owner, an elderly Filipino man, came over to our table as we were finishing dinner. He spoke to Maureen in Tagalog, and she laughed and responded. What did he say? I asked. He said you look happy together. He said his wife thinks you're a good match. A good match. I liked the sound of that. Tell him thank you, I said. Tell him I'm the luckiest man in Manila tonight. She translated, and the old man smiled and nodded at me. He says you're welcome back any time, Maureen said. He says any friend of mine is a friend of his. Back at the hotel, she unpacked her overnight bag like she was moving in permanently, her toothbrush next to mine, her clothes in the dresser, her phone charger plugged in next to the bed. Is this okay? She asked. I thought we'd want to spend every minute together. Of course it was okay. I'd been dreaming about this for months. I brought enough clothes for the whole 2 weeks, she said. I was hoping you'd want me to stay. Want her to stay? I couldn't imagine her going anywhere. I want you here every night, I told her. I want to wake up next to you every morning. She curled up against me that night, her head on my chest. The air conditioning hummed quietly, and through the window, I could hear the distant sounds of Manila traffic. I love you, Harold, she whispered in the dark. I love you too, I whispered back, meaning every word. But as I lay there listening to her breathe, something felt different than I'd expected. Not bad, just different. She seemed quieter than during our video calls, more reserved. During our calls, she was always animated, always laughing at my stories about the railroad or my neighbor's ridiculous dog. In person, she seemed more careful, more guarded. I told myself it was just nerves. We were both nervous. The next morning, I woke up before her and spent a few minutes just watching her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so young. Her hair was spread across the pillow, and she had this slight smile on her lips like she was having a good dream. I thought about Martha, how she used to sleep with one hand under her cheek. But this was different. This was new love, not the comfortable love of 35 years of marriage. This was exciting and terrifying and wonderful all at once. We ordered room service for breakfast, and Maureen was more like herself again. Talkative, funny, interested in my stories about the flight and my first impressions of Manila. What do you think of the Philippines so far? She asked. It's beautiful, I said. Different than I expected, but beautiful. She smiled. Wait until you see more. I have so many places to show you. We're going to have the best 2 weeks. She was right. I was determined to make every moment count. The money conversation started that second morning. We were finishing breakfast when Maureen's phone rang. She answered in Tagalog, her voice getting more and more stressed as the conversation went on. When she hung up, tears were forming in her eyes. Everything okay? I asked. She shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. My brother had a motorcycle accident. He's in the hospital and my family can't afford the bills. My heart broke for her. How much do they need? I asked immediately. She looked surprised, like she hadn't expected me to offer. Oh, Harold, I wasn't asking for money. I would never ask you for money. But she was crying now, really crying. It's just, the bills are 30,000 pesos, and we don't have it. If they don't pay, the hospital won't treat him properly. 30,000 pesos. I did the math quickly in my head. About $600. Money I could afford, especially if it meant helping the woman I loved. Of course I'll help, I said. Family is family. Her face lit up like sunrise. Really? You would do that for us? She reached across the table and grabbed my hands. I can't believe how generous you are. How good you are. The way she looked at me in that moment, with such gratitude and love, made me feel like a hero. "We can go to the bank this afternoon," I said. "Whatever your family needs." We spent the morning walking around Makati, and Maureen seemed lighter, happier. She pointed out buildings where she'd worked, shops where she liked to buy clothes, cafes where she met friends. "I want you to see my life," she said. "I want you to understand who I am when you're not here." We stopped at a small church, and she lit a candle for her brother. "Thank you," she whispered to me as we sat in the pew. "Thank you for caring about my family." I squeezed her hand. "They're my family now too." The bank visit that afternoon felt significant, like we were taking a step together. Maureen translated everything for me, helped me fill out the forms, guided me through the transfer process. When the transaction went through, she cried happy tears. Relief tears. "You saved him," she said. "You literally saved my brother's life." That night, she was more affectionate than she'd been since I arrived. More present. She laughed at my jokes again, asked me questions about my life back home. We made love for the first time, and afterward, she held me tight and whispered, "I'm so lucky to have you." I believed her completely. This was what love felt like when you found the right person. But something started shifting in the following days. Subtle at first, then more obvious. Maureen became distracted during our conversations. She'd zone out while I was talking, staring at her phone or out the window. When I asked what was wrong, she'd say, "Nothing, just tired." She started sleeping in later, leaving me to eat breakfast alone while she scrolled through social media. The animated woman from our video calls seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone going through the motions. "Are you okay?" I asked one morning after she'd barely spoken during breakfast. "You seem different." She looked at me with irritation. Different how? I couldn't explain it without sounding paranoid. Just less engaged, less present, like you're somewhere else in your head. She sighed, a sound that was becoming more and more familiar. "Harold, I'm not a performer. I can't be on all the time like I am during our video calls. This is just who I am in real life." That stung more than I expected. Who she was during our video calls wasn't real. Those late-night conversations where we talked for hours about everything and nothing, those weren't real. "I didn't mean it like that," she said, seeing my face. "I just meant, real life is different than video calls. It's more complicated." More complicated. I tried to understand what she meant, but it felt like she was speaking in code. During our calls, she'd always been so interested in my stories, my thoughts, my day. Now, when I tried to tell her about the interesting people I'd met in the lobby or something funny I'd seen on the street, she'd nod politely, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. The money requests became more frequent after that first hospital bill. Her mother needed rent money because her hours at work had been cut. 50,000 pesos this time. Her tutoring contract had expired unexpectedly, and she needed money for food while she looked for new students. 20,000 pesos. Each time, she'd preface the request with, "I hate asking you for this," or "I feel so guilty, but I don't know who else to turn to." Each time, I'd transfer the money without hesitation. What was money compared to love? What was money compared to being needed by someone who cared about me? But I started noticing patterns. The requests always came right after we'd had a moment of physical intimacy. Right after she'd told me she loved me. Right after I'd felt closest to her. And there was something in her voice when she asked, something that didn't quite match the desperation of the supposed emergencies. She'd ask with her eyes down, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized. "I never ask you for things, right?" she said one evening as we lay in bed after making love. "I mean, I'm not like those other girls you hear about. I don't want your money for shopping or jewelry. It's always for my family, for emergencies." She was right. Every request had been for something urgent, something necessary. But why did she feel the need to point that out? Why did she need me to confirm that she wasn't using me? "Of course," I said. "I know you're not like that." She smiled and kissed my forehead. "Good. Because I would never take advantage of your kindness. You know that, right?" I nodded, but a small voice in the back of my head whispered a question I didn't want to acknowledge. The disappearances started in the second week. Maureen would tell me she had to meet with potential tutoring clients or visit family members, and she'd be gone for hours. 4 hours. 6 hours. 8 hours. I'd sit in that hotel room, watching Filipino television I couldn't understand, waiting for her to come back. The loneliness was crushing. I'd call the front desk just to have someone to talk to. I'd go down to the lobby and sit in the cafe, nursing a coffee for 2 hours just to be around other people. When Maureen did return from these mysterious outings, she'd be distant and tired. How did it go? I'd ask about her supposed tutoring meetings. Fine, she'd say. Just business stuff. Boring. She'd shower immediately, which seemed odd since she'd supposedly just been sitting in a cafe teaching English. Then she'd curl up in bed with her phone, scrolling through Facebook or Instagram. When I tried to cuddle with her, she'd say she was tired. When I tried to talk to her about my day, she'd say she had a headache. I started feeling like a guest in my own vacation, like I was intruding on her life instead of sharing it. Maybe we could do something together tomorrow, I'd suggest. I'd love to see more of the city. She'd look up from her phone with barely concealed annoyance. I have commitments, Harold. I can't just drop everything because you're here. But wasn't that the point? Wasn't I here specifically so we could be together? I thought we'd spend more time together. I'd say, that's what we talked about. She'd sigh. We are spending time together. We sleep in the same bed. We eat meals together. What more do you want? One morning, I decided to surprise her with breakfast in bed. I got up early and walked to a nearby bakery, bought fresh pandesal and coffee, maybe some pastries she'd like. When I came back to the room, I could hear her on the phone, speaking in Tagalog. Her voice was different than I'd heard before. Softer, more intimate. She was laughing the same musical laugh I'd fallen in love with during our video calls. The laugh I hadn't heard since our first night in Manila. I stood outside the door for a moment, not wanting to interrupt but curious about who could make her sound so happy. When I finally entered, she quickly ended the call. Who was that? I asked casually, setting down the breakfast. Just a friend, she said, not looking at me. A girlfriend from college. But something about the way she said it, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, made me doubt her. She sounded nice, I said. Maybe I could meet her sometime. Maureen shook her head quickly. She's very busy. She doesn't really speak English anyway. Later that morning, her phone buzzed while she was in the shower. A message preview lit up the screen. When can I see you again? Last night was amazing. My blood turned to ice. I stared at that message for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Last night, when she'd supposedly been visiting her sick aunt. Last night when she'd come home at midnight, exhausted and quiet, claiming her aunt had needed help with medical paperwork. When Maureen came out of the bathroom, she saw me standing there, her phone in my hand. Why are you looking at my phone? She demanded, snatching it away from me. That's private. That's not respect. I stammered, trying to explain. It was buzzing, and I saw the message preview. I wasn't snooping. She stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold. Calculating. Don't check my phone again, she said. Ever. That's a boundary. A boundary. Like I was some stranger she'd just met instead of the man she claimed to love. The message kept playing in my head all day. When can I see you again? Last night was amazing. Last night when she'd supposedly been taking care of her sick aunt. Last night when she'd come home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. Who was that message from? I finally asked that evening. She looked up from her phone with annoyance. What message? She knew exactly what message. The one that said, when can I see you again? She rolled her eyes. Oh, that was from a student. A female student who wants to schedule more lessons. A female student who said last night was amazing? A female student who used language that sounded distinctly romantic? I wanted to ask, but I was afraid of the answer. I was afraid of being called paranoid or controlling. The word clingy started coming up more and more in our conversations. When I asked where she was going, she'd say I was being clingy. When I asked who she was texting, she'd say I was being clingy. When I suggested we spend the evening together instead of her going out to another mysterious meeting, she'd say I was being clingy. You don't own me, Harold, she said one night when I asked why she'd been gone for 10 hours. I'm not your property. I'm a person with my own life. Of course she was. I wasn't trying to control her. I was just trying to understand Why the woman who used to want to spend every waking moment talking to me now seemed to barely tolerate my presence. I just thought we'd spend more time together, I said. That's what relationships are about, right? Wanting to be with each other? She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. This isn't like the movies, Harold. People have responsibilities. I have work. I have family obligations. I can't just ignore my entire life because you're here for 2 weeks. But what about the life we'd talked about building together? What about the plans we'd made during those video calls? What about the future she'd described where I'd move to the Philippines and we'd get married and be together all the time? The night she didn't come back was the night everything changed. She told me she was going to visit her aunt in Quezon City, the same aunt she'd supposedly visited the night I saw that text message. I might stay over, she said casually, not looking at me as she packed an overnight bag. It's far, and it's easier than traveling back so late. It made sense, logically, but something in my gut told me it wasn't true. What's your aunt's number? I asked, in case there's an emergency. She paused, her hand on the zipper of her bag. Why would there be an emergency? I shrugged. Just in case. I worry about you traveling alone at night. She gave me a number, but something about the way she recited it, like she was making it up on the spot, made me suspicious. I'll call you before bed, she said, kissing my cheek. Don't wait up. I might be late. I kissed her goodbye at noon and told her to be safe. The hours crawled by. I tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to take a nap. Nothing worked. The loneliness in that hotel room was suffocating. Midnight came and went. No call, no message. I tried calling her phone, straight to voicemail. 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. I called the number she'd given me for her aunt. The voice that answered spoke no English, but from what I could understand, they didn't know anyone named Maureen. 3 in the morning. I was pacing that hotel room like a caged animal. 4 in the morning. I was seriously considering calling the police when I heard the key card in the door. She walked in at 6 in the morning. And immediately I knew something was wrong. Her hair was messed up, not just from sleeping but like someone had run their hands through it. Her clothes were wrinkled in a way that suggested they'd been taken off and put back on. She smelled like cologne. Not the subtle kind I wore, but something heavier, younger, more expensive. Where were you? I asked, not accusingly, just relieved she was safe. I told you, my aunt's house. She walked past me to the bathroom without making eye contact. Why didn't you answer your phone? I was worried sick. She turned around, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something like contempt in her eyes. My phone died. And why are you acting like a child? I told you where I was going. A child. She called me a child for being worried about the woman I loved being missing for 18 hours. I called your aunt's number, I said. The person who answered didn't know you. She didn't miss a beat. Different aunt. I have several aunts. I gave you the wrong number by mistake. I followed her to the bathroom door. Maureen, something's wrong. You're different. We're different. Can we please just talk about what's happening? She was brushing her teeth, and she met my eyes in the mirror. There was no warmth there, no love, no recognition of the intimacy we'd supposedly shared. After she rinsed, she turned to face me. What's happening is that you're being paranoid and possessive. I went to see my aunt. I stayed over because it was late and dangerous to travel. That's it. That's the whole story. But it wasn't the whole story. I could see it in her eyes. I could smell it on her clothes. I could feel it in the way she wouldn't look directly at me anymore, the way she flinched when I tried to touch her. Is there someone else? The question came out before I could stop it. She froze, toothbrush still in her hand. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then she shrugged. Actually shrugged, like I'd asked her about the weather. You knew what this was, she said quietly. Those 5 words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean I knew what this was? She set down the toothbrush and leaned against the sink, looking at me with something approaching pity. Harold, you're a nice man. You've been very good to me. But you knew this wasn't like a real relationship. Not the way you think of relationships. I felt like I was drowning. What are you talking about? We talked every day for a year. You told me you loved me. You said you wanted to build a life together. She looked almost sad now, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. I showed you what you wanted to see. What you needed to see. But I never lied to you about what I needed. What she needed. Money. She needed money, and I had money, and everything else was just performance. Every laugh, every I love you, every moment of intimacy was just her earning her keep. Wasn't any of it real? I asked, my voice breaking. The conversations, the plans we made, the way you looked at me when I sent money for your brother. She didn't answer immediately. She walked past me to the bed and started getting dressed for work, like this was just another Tuesday morning. Does it matter? She finally said. You got what you wanted. I got what I needed. What I wanted. What did I want? I wanted love. I wanted companionship. I wanted someone to care about me the way I cared about them. What did I get? I got played. I got used. I got reminded that at 62 I was too old and too naive to tell the difference between love and performance. She left for work that morning like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just destroyed everything I thought we had. I sat on the edge of that bed for hours, trying to process what she'd told me. You knew what this was, but I didn't know. I thought it was love. I thought she cared about me the way I cared about her. I thought those late-night video calls were real. I thought her tears when I sent money were real. I thought her whispered, I love yous in the dark were real. How naive could one man be? I started packing that afternoon. Slowly, methodically, folding my clothes back into the suitcase I'd unpacked with such hope just 2 weeks earlier. My hands were shaking, not from anger but from shock. I wasn't angry. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I was just hollow, empty, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out everything that made me feel alive. A hotel housekeeper knocked on the door and asked if I needed fresh towels. Sir, you okay? She asked, seeing my face and the suitcase on the bed. I tried to smile. I think I was in love with a video, I told her. She looked confused, but she patted my shoulder anyway. Sorry, sir, she said in broken English. Sorry. I checked out of the hotel without leaving a note. What was there to say? Thank you for showing me how foolish an old man can be. Thank you for taking my money and giving me just enough affection to keep me hoping. I took a taxi to a cheap motel across town, a place where the air conditioning barely worked and the sheets smelled like bleach. But it was honest. It was exactly what it appeared to be. Nothing more, nothing less. From my new room, I sent Maureen one message, take care. I really did love you. Please don't do this to the next man. She never replied. I wasn't surprised. Why would she? Our transaction was complete. She'd gotten what she needed, and I'd learned what I needed to learn. I deleted her number, deleted our photos, deleted the video calls I'd saved on my phone. I deleted our entire year of conversations. A whole year of my life gone with the press of a button. I stayed in Manila for another week, not because I enjoyed it, but because changing my flight would cost more money than I wanted to spend. I'd already spent enough. I walked around the city like a ghost. I visited Lunita Park, ate street food in Chinatown, rode the jeepneys just to feel like I was doing something. I watched other couples, wondering how many of them were real and how many were just transactions disguised as romance. A child selling handmade trinkets approached me one day, and I almost bought something just to feel useful again. But I walked on. I was done being useful to people who didn't care about me. On my last day, I sat in a cafe near the airport, drinking coffee that was too strong and watching the city wake up around me. I thought about Martha, my wife of 35 years, who'd never asked me for anything except my love and attention. I thought about my empty house in Ohio, which suddenly didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like home, like refuge, like the place where I could go back to being myself instead of whoever I'd pretended to be for Maureen. I'm not broken, but I'm not who I was when I stepped off that plane 2 weeks ago. I came here for love. I left with a mirror that showed me how desperate I'd become, how willing I was to believe anything that made me feel wanted again. Maureen didn't break my heart. She held up a mirror and showed me I'd already broken it myself, long before I ever heard her laugh on a video call. She was sweet on the screen, but in person she showed me everything I needed to know. About her, about me, about the difference between love and loneliness, between connection and transaction, between what's real and what we tell ourselves is real because the truth is too hard to face.